Okay, so this presentation is going to be on Mercury. So where's Mercury? Mercury is the closest out of all the planets in our solar system to the Sun. It is only about 36 million miles to the Sun, and therefore only takes 88 Earth days to orbit the Sun. So you can see here's Mercury. This isn't up to scale, but this is the placements of all the planets. And so as you can see, Mercury is the closest to the Sun, and it's only one planet away from Earth. Moons and gravity. Mercury does not have any moons. This is because of how close it is to the Sun. The orbit of the moon around it would just get messed up because of the gravitational pull that the Sun has. The moon would not be able to orbit properly. That is a theory, but it's a pretty common theory. Mercury has 2.4 times the amount of gravity on Earth. So if you weighed, for example, 70 pounds on Earth, you would weigh about 25 pounds on Mercury. The discovery of Mercury. Nobody really knows how or when Mercury was discovered, but the first known sighting of the small planet known as Mercury was in the 17th century by Galileo and Thomas Harriot. The two astronomers spotted the planet through one of the first telescopes. Mercury is named after the Roman messenger god. So Mercury's layers. This is the layer of the surface on Mercury. So as you can see, this thin black part right here is the crust. And then over here you get your mantle, which is green. You have a solid layer, which is really thin. Well, it's not too thin, but it's like about the same size as the mantle. And then you have a liquid middle core and solid core. And then similar to this diagram, this is Mercury's atmosphere, and it's more of a pie chart. But you get Mercury is 39% sodium, 52% oxygen, 8% helium, and 1% others, and that's the atmosphere around Mercury. So Mercury doesn't have much of an atmosphere. The surface features. So one of the most common surface features on Mercury is craters. Craters are located in many spots across the planet. These places on Mercury that are completely covered with craters and places that are entirely smooth. Some of the craters can be up to 1,300 kilometers across. So here are some of the craters, and this is zoomed out pretty far. So these are actually really big. And then you have wrinkles because Mercury has been shrinking. So these are some fun facts about Mercury. And my bibliography. So thank you so much for watching and have a good day.
Alright, I am here to talk about the amazing Venus. The reason I picked Venus is because I felt like other people are going to pick other planets like Mars and Saturn, and I felt like Venus is going to get underrepresented, so I wanted to talk about him. Or her, I don't care. Okay, so you might have heard of it, but Venus, in fact, orbits a little-known star called the Sun. It orbits the Sun around 67.24 million miles away, and even though this is not to scale, I think you get the point. The orbit time of Venus is 225 days. Here's where things get a little more interesting. So there's many theories and things on the internet about why Venus has no moons, and it's kind of a mystery. But there's some pretty strong evidence out there of why. So some people believe that it has no moons because the moon would just burn up because Venus is so close to the sun. But also people are thinking that if it had a moon, it would affect the gravity of everything around it, and it would maybe like orbit the sun and be like a Pluto type situation. Yeah, so it was pretty interesting to look into that. So, speaking of gravity, the gravity of Venus is 8.87 meters per second squared. And I think it would be cool to like do a science experiment to test out like all the different gravity of each of the planets and like see in some way, I don't know how, but I'm kind of putting a lot of work on you, sorry. But it would be cool to have like experiments like that. So now to talk about the surface of Venus. The surface of Venus has lots of tectonic activity, which can affect um, things like the land and everything, and it can also cause earthquakes to form. Another thing is it has a lot of craters, and I also found out that it has the same or like very close to the amount of craters on Earth, which is around 800, which I thought was pretty cool. These craters can also be smoothed out by the lava coming from its many volcanoes, which is pretty awesome, if you ask me, which is why Venus is the best planet. Thank you for listening, sir. I hope you learned more, which you probably already knew more than me.
Alright, Mars, also known as the Red Planet or Mars with a Z. So, first of all, it orbits our sun, of course, and the distance from the sun is 141,600,000 miles away. And that's approximate, of course. The length of 1 year on Mars is 687 Earth days, which is about 2 Earth years, due to its distance from the sun. Mars has 2 moons, Phobos and Deimos, which are Greek minor gods. The magnitude of gravity on Mars is approximately 3.711 meters per second squared, which is about a third of Earth's gravity. A little bit less than, or greater than a third of Earth's gravity. So Mars has layers that are just about like Earth's, with an atmosphere and then a crust and a mantle and then a core. And that's actually exactly like Earth's layers. Okay, so the Mars' feature, it's red, which gives it the name the Red Planet. It is very rocky and extremely dusty, as you can see from these pictures. At the poles, it has ice caps that are made out of carbon dioxide, so dry ice, instead of regular ice made out of water. And Mars is home to most of the biggest mountains in the solar system, the biggest of which is Olympus Mons, which is 3 times as tall as Mount Everest. That's all.
Mars orbits the Sun, and it is 141.6 million miles from the Sun. And it takes Mars 687 days to orbit the Sun once. That is more than 1 year for us. And that is Mars, and that is the facts about Mars. And also, we have sent machine car thingies there to look at it and see what's on it and stuff like that. So, thank you guys so much, and bye!
Okay, so the planet that I'm doing is Jupiter, and all the facts about it. So first I'm gonna start off by telling you like what it's like on Jupiter, like what kind of atmosphere it has and stuff. So this wasn't discovered until later on, but scientists actually figure out that Jupiter has a total of 4 rings, but they're very faint, and so that's why um, you couldn't really. It took them a while to figure that out. And also, Jupiter is coated in a thin layer of clouds, which is made up of 90% hydrogen and 10% helium, and also other small amounts of other gases. Jupiter has a red spot, which you can see on the pictures you look at. And its red spot is a storm that's actually 2 times the size of Earth and has been going on basically for over a century. And then the color that Jupiter's is just like shades of red, white, orange, brown, and yellow, but the pattern of its colors actually changes with the wind patterns and storms that happen on Jupiter. So Jupiter orbits our sun every 10 hours, but that's actually 12 years on Earth. So every 12 years to us is 10 hours on Jupiter, and that's the time that it takes for Jupiter to rotate the sun. And Jupiter is 5.2 astronomical units away from our sun, which is 484 million miles. Jupiter has 24.79 meters per second squared of gravity, which is 2.4 times the amount of gravity that's on Earth. So the things that have helped discover Jupiter so I'm just gonna give you a list of events. So first it was Galileo, who, and this event happened in 1610. This is when the first detailed observation of Jupiter happened. The next one was Pioneer 10, which happened in 1973, and Pioneer 10 was the first spacecraft ever to cross the astronomical belt and fly past Jupiter. And then next happened Voyager 1 and 2 in 1794. And this discovered the faint rings, so that is when the rings were discovered. And they also discovered things like new moons and volcanic activity on one of the moon's surfaces. Next was Ulysses. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but it's that happened on February 8th, 1992. So basically, this spacecraft swung by Jupiter, and basically Jupiter's gravity was so strong that it bent the flight of the spacecraft to the south. And then in 1994, scientists observed pieces of comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 that collided with Jupiter's southern hemisphere, so they just made observations on that. And then from 1995 to 2003, Galileo dropped a probe on Jupiter, which conducted more observations of Jupiter, along with more observations of its moons and rings. In 2000, Cassini made the closest approach to Jupiter, about 6.2 million miles away from it. And it took the first detailed photo color, or the first detailed colored photo of Jupiter. In 2007, images were taken by NASA's New Horizons spacecraft of Jupiter while it was on the way to Pluto, which this introduced new views of Jupiter's storms, rings, volcanic activity, as well as its icy parts. In 2009, on July 20th, a comet or asteroid, it's not really known which one it was, crashed into Jupiter's southern hemisphere again. And then 2011, Juno got launched to Jupiter. So yeah, basically in 2011, Juno got launched to Jupiter, and then in 2016, Juno arrived on Jupiter. And this gave us more information about the chemistry, the atmosphere, and the interior structure and magnetosphere of Jupiter. So some other cool facts about Jupiter is that Jupiter can be seen from Earth without you having to use a telescope, and Jupiter is the fastest spinning planet. Jupiter has been visited a total of 7 times by spacecraft, and Jupiter also has a line of pearls, which are massive counterclockwise storms that are made up of white gas. So it's like basically mini storms that look like pearls, and you can also see that in some images that you see. So yeah, that is all there is about Jupiter. So yeah.
Okay, so this is my Saturn presentation about Saturn, which is the yellow gas giant. So we're going to talk about Saturn and the Sun. So Saturn is the second largest planet in the solar system, and it orbits our Sun, obviously. It's 890.8 million miles away from the Sun compared to Earth's 92.96 million miles. So that's about like almost 10 times as much. It takes 10 times as many miles away. Saturn's 10 times as many miles away than Earth is to the Sun. It takes 29 Earth years for Saturn to orbit the Sun. So if you were to somehow stand on Saturn, it would take you 29 years to go around the Sun. So Saturn's properties. Saturn has 62 known moons, and 9 of them are waiting to be named. Some you might know are Titan, because that's like the biggest one, I believe. Saturn's gravity is 10.44 meters per second squared compared to Earth's like 8.80665 or something. So if you were to weigh 100 pounds on Earth, you'd weigh 114 pounds on Saturn. And even though Saturn is a gas giant, which means it's just really big, the gravity is only a little bit bigger. The reason that this is a thing is because it pretty much just means that the only way that it's bigger is when gas giants, so they have about the same mass as Earth. Because gas weighs less than solid rock, even though Saturn is like 10 times bigger than Earth, it only weighs a little bit more. Okay, here's a diagram of Saturn showing the moons and how they orbit. This is Titan, the biggest. And the core is rocky, but then the this area right here would be like icy, frozen. Obviously, it's really cold there. So some surface features is it's a gas giant, which means that it's just made of gas except for the core. So if you were to somehow stand on top of it, you just fall through until you hit the core, and you just get stuck in the middle. It's made of 94% hydrogen and 6% helium, as well as small amounts of other gases. And Saturn has rings too. They're made of like rocks and dust, but people don't know if they're new rings, like recently formed, or just really super old ones, because we've only been able to study it for a little bit. Some spacecrafts that helped the understanding of Saturn was the Pioneer 11 was the first one to go to Saturn, and it did so in 1979. It helped study Saturn up close. The Voyager 1 and 2 flew by 2 years later, and they helped study the moons. Then, 15 years ago, in 2004, Cassini went into Saturn's orbit, and it helps us study the ring systems, the moons, and Saturn itself, like the surface features. Okay, so here's some fun facts. Saturn is the least dense planet, so if you were to put it in a bathtub, it would float. So if somehow you made Saturn into a ball and put it in a bathtub, it would float. And it rotates so fast on its equator that it's up to 8,000 miles longer than its poles. So it looks like a deflated ball almost. So you can see Saturn with your own eyes without a telescope. Saturn has only been visited 4 times, the 4 that we just saw: Voyager 1, 2, Pioneer 11, and Cassini. And the spacecraft sent in 2004 was the first to go into Saturn's orbit. So, yeah, that's pretty much it about Saturn. If you want to know more, you can do some research yourself.
Calypso is one of the moons of the sixth planet in our solar system, Saturn. Calypso is a Trojan moon, which means that it orbits another moon, and the moon that it orbits is called Tethys, which is one of the biggest moons in our solar system. Since it's so far away from the Sun, it takes 29.4 Earth years to orbit it once. Its gravity is so small because it's such a small planet. It's only 6.6 miles in diameter. It's 183,000 miles from Saturn, and we know so much about this because of the Cassini probe, which lasted almost 20 years in its journey to learn more about Saturn. It was launched by both NASA and the European Space Agency to learn more about it because we didn't know much about it at that time. In September 2017, it was launched into Saturn, and that was the last we ever heard from it.
So this is my science project on Titan. And Titan is one of Saturn's 62 moons. And I picked it because it's named after Kronos, who is the Greek Titan who is the father to all of the Greek gods. And it's the only other planet in our solar system that has lakes. The lakes are made out of liquid methane, and the surface temperature is negative 290 degrees Fahrenheit, so they're frozen solid. And it's 4 billion years old. It orbits Saturn, and it's almost 10 times as far from the sun as Earth, which is very far away and incredible. But it takes 15 days and 22 hours for one orbit around Saturn, which is about 16 days. But Saturn takes 29 years to orbit around the sun. So it's orbiting around very slowly. So it has the surface and atmosphere, which is 4 times as dense as Earth. Then it has a frozen shell of methane. And it has the underground oceans, which are just like these. So the mantle is very thick, and the oceans are underneath there. So you don't really get to see that the oceans are actually there, even though they're oceans. They're probably frozen or just very ice cold. But then you get to the compacted ice, which is under high pressure, which is the layer closest to the core, which is made of hydrosilicate, which just silicone pretty much. And the core is huge. The layers around it are very thin compared to the actual core. The atmosphere is made of nitrogen, methane, and hydrogen, and a little bit of other things. So if you were to go to Titan, make sure to bring oxygen with you.
Hi, my name is Noah, and welcome to my presentation on Neptune. Neptune is the 8th and last planet in our solar system. It orbits the same star as us, the Sun. Neptune is 2.793 billion miles away from the Sun. Earth is only 92.96 million miles away. That means that Neptune is more than 30 times farther away from the Sun than the Earth. It takes Neptune 165 years to orbit the Sun. Neptune has 14 moons, including my favorite in the universe, Haumede, Hippocamp, and Triton. On Neptune, the gravity is 11.15 meters per second squared. On Earth, the gravity is 9.8 meters per second squared. That's basically a fancy phrase for saying if we were to drop something, that's how fast it would be going. So if you weighed 100 pounds on Earth, then you'd weigh 114 pounds on Neptune. Neptune has 4 major parts of its crust.
Neptune is also part of the gas giant planets. Neptune has some of the wildest weather in the solar system. It has bands of storms that produce extremely high winds that can get up to 2,100 miles per hour. The temps can range from -20 to -330 degrees Fahrenheit. When you look at Neptune, you will see a dark spot. At first, the Great Dark Spot appears to be a very large storm, similar to Jupiter's Great Red Spot, but later scientists found out that it's likely that Neptune's Great Dark Spot is a hole in the methane cloud deck, similar to the ozone hole experienced on Earth. Neptune has a thin layer of clouds floating above its atmosphere. Neptune's thick atmosphere consists of mostly helium, hydrogen, and methane, but also consists of water, ammonia, and other ices. Methane is what gives Neptune its blue color. Next comes the mantle, which is made up of water, ammonia, and methane gas and methane ices. The core of the planet is relatively small. It consists of rock and ice. That's it. Neptune is the 8th planet from the Sun. It is about 2.8 billion miles away and takes 165 Earth years to orbit the Sun. In 2011, Neptune completed its first orbit since it was discovered in 1846. Fun facts! Neptune was the first planet to be located by mathematical equations. Triton, Neptune's largest moon, was discovered only 17 days after people discovered Neptune. This moon is also unusual because it is one of the only large moons in our solar system that orbits in the opposite direction that the planet rotates. Neptune actually has 6 rings, but they're hard to see. The only spacecraft that has ventured to Neptune is Voyager 2. In 1989, Voyager 2 captured the first close-up pictures of Neptune. That's all, folks.
So the celestial body I'm studying is RxJ1856.5-3754. This is a neutron star, which is pretty interesting. It's located 40 million light years away from Earth, and the magnitude is 225.6. And what magnitude is its magnitude is the measure of brightness of a celestial body as seen by a person on Earth. And what's kind of funny about having a magnitude of 25.6 is that it is 10 million times fainter than the human eye can see. So it's very impossible for the human eye to see this in the night sky. This picture in the background is actually taken by an X-ray photo. It wasn't actually taken by a normal camera. Well, the neutron star is actually really small. It's only 19 to 41 kilometers. You don't know exactly since it's far away. But the reason it's so small is a neutron star is made from when a star collapses in on itself from a supernova, and it just keeps eating itself and condensing. So it's super, super, super dense, and that's why it's small. So at one point it was probably bigger than our Earth before it went through supernova. But the gravitational pull of it, since it's super dense, it's very massive even though it's small, so there's a lot of mass, is the gravitational pull is 2 times 10 to the 11th meters per second squared, or it's 200 billion. That's the 200 billion meters per second squared is the gravity by a neutron star. And, well, a neutron star is basically kind of like a fluked black hole, because it's a star that collapsed in on itself that wasn't big enough that didn't have enough mass to create a black hole, so it created a neutron star, which has an insane amount of gravity. That gravity is 200 billion times greater than the gravity on Earth. So if you went near it, you it's kind of like a black hole too. You get sucked in, but it's not so much gravity that light can't come through.